The rain falls in heavy sheets against the windows of the philosopher's den, a dimly lit bar tucked away in a forgotten corner of Greenwich Village. Outside, New York City moves with its characteristic restlessness, but inside, time seems to slow. The establishment's worn leather booths and oak panels have absorbed decades of heated discussions, whispered confidences, and intellectual revelations. Tonight, the bar holds just a handful of patrons, most keeping to themselves, nursing their drinks in thoughtful silence. In the far corner, beneath a flickering Edison bulb, sits a peculiar pair of men who seem both out of time and perfectly at home in this sanctuary of thought. One is slight, but commanding, with a magnificent mustache that seems to have a life of its own. His eyes, intense and feverish, dart about the room as if hunting for weakness. This is Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher whose ideas would later be twisted by fascists, but whose actual work represents one of the most profound challenges to conventional morality ever conceived. Across from him sits a figure of striking contrast. Rigid in posture, methodical in movement, Immanuel Kant's piercing gaze suggests a mind constantly processing, organizing, categorizing the world according to principles only he fully comprehends. His clothes are simple but immaculate, much like the logical structures of his philosophical systems. Between them, untouched, sit two glasses, whiskey for Nietzsche, a simple tea for Kant. The bartender, having recognized something unusual in their intense conversation, keeps his distance, occasionally glancing over with undisguised curiosity. "So, Herr Kant," Nietzsche says, leaning forward with a wolfish grin, "you truly believe there exists some universal moral law, some cosmic ought that binds all rational beings?" His voice carries both amusement and challenge, like a predator toying with prey before the kill. Kant adjusts his position, a slight but deliberate movement. "It is not a matter of belief, Nietzsche, but of reason itself. Morality is not something we discover in the world like a fossil or a star. It is what any rational being must conclude through proper reasoning." His voice is measured, each word selected with precision. "The categorical imperative is not my invention but my discovery, that we must act only according to that maxim whereby we can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law." Nietzsche throws his head back and laughs, a sound both genuine and theatrical. The few other patrons turn briefly before returning to their drinks. Universal law, as if the universe concerns itself with human notions of right and wrong. Nietzsche's eyes narrow. "Tell me, Kant, have you ever wondered why your supposed universal morality so perfectly aligns with the Christian morality of your homeland? What a remarkable coincidence that the fundamental moral law of all existence happens to match the customs of 18th century Prussia." The rain intensifies outside, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. Lightning briefly illuminates the bar, casting dramatic shadows across both men's faces. Kant remains unmoved by both the storm and the provocation. "You misunderstand me, Nietzsche. I do not claim that the specific customs of any society represent the moral law. Rather, I argue that the form of moral reasoning, the test of universalizability, transcends all cultural particulars. It is a procedural test, not a list of commandments. A test designed by whom? For whom?" Nietzsche counters, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, forcing Kant to lean in. "Every morality, every thou shalt, serves someone's purpose, advances someone's will to power. Your categorical imperative is merely the will to power of reason itself. Reason's attempt to tyrannize the passions, to subjugate life to its bloodless abstractions." A server approaches with fresh drinks, hesitates at the intensity of their exchange, then silently places them on the table before retreating. Neither philosopher acknowledges the interruption. "How you speak as if reason were some foreign invader," Kant responds, a rare note of passion entering his voice. "But reason is our very essence as humans. To be guided by reason is not slavery, but the only possible freedom. Your celebration of instinct and passion, where does that lead but to chaos? To the strong dominating the weak with no principle to restrain them?" Nietzsche's smile widens. "Now we approach the heart of it. You fear what humans might become without your moral straitjacket. You fear the heights and depths to which the truly free spirit might soar or plunge. Your universal morality is a cage built by the weak to contain the strong, a useful illusion, nothing more." Thunder crashes outside as if nature itself wishes to punctuate Nietzsche's challenge. The few remaining patrons have gone silent, unconsciously drawn into the gravitational field of this collision of worldviews. The bartender glances at the clock. Midnight has just passed, though neither philosopher seems to notice or care. They have only begun to unpack their fundamental disagreement, and the night stretches before them, promising deeper revelations and sharper confrontations as they circle this most essential question. Is morality written into the fabric of reality, or merely a story we tell ourselves to make life bearable? The philosopher's den grows quieter as the hour advances. Two patrons slip out into the now softening rain, leaving just the bartender, who pretends to clean glasses while eavesdropping, and an elderly professor asleep in a corner booth. The confrontation between the two philosophical titans has reached a moment of pause, a gathering of breath before the next exchange. Kant takes a measured sip of his tea, which has long gone cold. His methodical movements reflect the orderly nature of his thinking. Let us approach this more systematically, Nietzsche. Consider what happens when we abandon the idea of universal moral principles. If morality is merely, as you suggest, an expression of power relations or cultural accidents, then on what grounds could we ever condemn any action at all? Nietzsche swirls his whiskey, watching the amber liquid catch the low light. You assume condemnation is necessary, typical of the priestly mentality, always eager to judge, to separate sheep from goats. He sets down his glass with deliberate care. I do not seek to condemn or absolve. I seek to understand how moralities function, what purposes they serve, what forms of life they enable or suppress. You evade the question, Kant presses. Without universal principles, how could one possibly object to slavery, genocide, or torture? Would these merely become matters of taste or cultural preference? The bartender nearly drops a glass, startled by the sudden turn toward such weighty matters. The sleeping professor stirs but does not wake. Nietzsche leans forward, his voice intense but controlled. Do you truly believe people refrain from murder merely because your categorical imperative forbids it? People avoid harming others primarily because they fear punishment, desire social approval, or simply lack the stomach for violence. Your grand moral architecture is built atop these more fundamental facts of human psychology. You confuse motivation with justification, Kant counters. Whether people act from duty or inclination is indeed a psychological question, but whether an action is right cannot depend on changeable feelings or cultural fashions. It must rest on something universal, the form of rational willing itself. A slow smile spreads across Nietzsche's face. Tell me, Kant, have you ever lived among the common people? Not studied them from your professorial perch, but truly lived as one of them. Their moralities are not philosophical systems, but practical tools for survival. The fisherman's ethics differ from the merchant's, the warrior's from the priest's. Each morality is adapted to its conditions, like a hand to a glove. That describes how moral beliefs vary, Kant acknowledges, not how moral truths vary. People once believed the earth was flat. Their belief did not make it so. Similarly, the diversity of moral beliefs does not disprove the existence of moral truth. Lightning flashes again, momentarily transforming the bar into a tableau of harsh contrasts. In that flash, Nietzsche's face appears almost demonic, while Kant's seems carved from marble. Your analogy fails, Nietzsche says. We can sail around the world to disprove a flat earth. But where is your experimental test for moral truth? There is none, because moral truths are not discoveries, but creations. Human, all too human. The bartender, having abandoned all pretense of not listening, pours himself a small drink and settles in at the far end of the bar. Consider this, Kant proposes. You have written passionately against the exploitation of the weak by the strong, against the hypocrisy of religious morality. Why bother with such critiques if morality is merely a matter of power and perspective? Your very passion betrays you, Nietzsche. You write as if appealing to some standard beyond mere preference. For a moment, Nietzsche seems caught off guard. He takes a larger sip of whiskey than usual. A perceptive observation, but you misunderstand my project. I do not claim that all moral systems are equally valid or that moral discourse is meaningless. I merely expose the origins of our moral intuitions, which are far less noble than we pretend. And what of your own values? Kant presses his advantage. Your celebration of honesty, courage, creativity, are these merely expressions of your personal will to power? Or do you believe them to be genuinely superior ways of being? Nietzsche's eyes flash with something like respect. You are a worthy opponent, Kant. Yes, I value honesty, specifically the courage to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves. I value creativity, the ability to forge new values rather than inheriting them unquestioned. But I do not claim these values float in some metaphysical realm of oughts. They are my values, suitable to my nature and my time. Then why should anyone else adopt them? Kant asks simply. Because they might enable a richer, more authentic existence, Nietzsche replies. I offer possibilities, not commandments. Each must determine what enhances or diminishes their own life. Kant shakes his head slowly. And so we arrive at a morality that cannot condemn even the most heinous acts, so long as they align with the perpetrator's sense of self-enhancement. This is the precipice your thinking leads us to, Nietzsche. Outside, the storm has begun to recede, but inside the philosopher's den, the intellectual tempest continues to build. Neither man seems aware of the time, now approaching 2 in the morning, as they circle closer to the core of their disagreement. Whether morality represents a transcendent truth or a human creation, and what follows from either answer. The night deepens. The elderly professor has finally departed, mumbling apologies as he shuffled past the philosopher's table. The bartender, giving up any pretense of professional distance, has pulled up a stool at a respectful distance, occasionally nodding as if he's following the complex exchange. In truth, he understands perhaps 1 word in 3, but feels instinctively that he's witnessing something extraordinary. The rain has stopped entirely, leaving New York streets glistening under streetlights. Through the window, early morning delivery trucks can be seen moving like ghosts through the emptied avenues. Let us test our positions with a concrete example, Kant suggests, his voice slightly hoarse from hours of debate. Consider a person who has borrowed money with no intention of repaying it, though they have promised to do so. Nietzsche sighs theatrically. Always the same examples from you moralists: lying, stealing, breaking promises. As if morality's only purpose were to make business transactions run smoothly. The simplicity serves clarity, Kant replies evenly. By my reasoning, such deception cannot be universalized without contradiction. If everyone borrowed with false promises, the very practice of lending would collapse and the deceptive borrower's maxim would undermine itself. And there we have it. Nietzsche slaps the table, startling the half-dozing bartender. Your supposedly universal morality reveals its true purpose: to protect property, to enforce contracts, to maintain the economic order. How convenient that the cosmic moral law happens to support the bourgeois virtues. Kant's expression remains impassive, but his fingers drum once against the tabletop, a rare display of impatience. You persist in misunderstanding. The categorical imperative is not concerned with consequences like economic stability, but with the logical consistency of our willing. A maxim that cannot be universalized without contradiction reveals a fundamental irrationality. Rationality, logic, consistency. Nietzsche counts off on his fingers. The holy trinity of the philosophical priesthood. But human life is not logical, Kant. It is contradictory, chaotic, constantly overflowing the banks of reason. Your error is treating humans as primarily thinking beings, when we are primarily feeling, willing, desiring creatures who occasionally think. The bartender, feeling suddenly self-conscious about his own undisciplined thoughts and impulses, pours himself another small drink. Our capacity for reason is what distinguishes us, Kant insists. Through it, we rise above mere animal existence and enter the realm of moral freedom. Nietzsche laughs, but there's a sharpness to it now. You speak of freedom while forging new chains. Your categorical imperative demands we amputate everything particular about ourselves, our desires, contexts, circumstances, to become interchangeable moral automata. I call that slavery, not freedom. True freedom cannot mean acting on every impulse, Kant counters. That would make us slaves to desire. Freedom must include the capacity to act against inclination, to follow principle. But whose principles? Nietzsche leans back, a calculating look in his eyes. Let me offer a different example. Consider American slavery, recently abolished in this very country. Slave owners justified their peculiar institution through elaborate moral reasoning, biblical interpretation, and appeals to natural order. Were they not acting on principle? Were they not convinced of the universal rightness of their position? The bartender visibly flinches at the mention of slavery, his discomfort a silent testimony to wounds still fresh in the American consciousness. Kant's brow furrows. They were wrong. Their maxims could not be universalized without contradiction. One cannot coherently will a world where any person might be arbitrarily enslaved, including oneself. But they did not will such a world, Nietzsche presses. They willed a world where people of African descent could be enslaved, not themselves. Their error was not logical but perceptual, failing to recognize the humanity they shared with those they enslaved. Which only proves my point, Kant responds. True morality requires us to recognize the universal humanity in all persons. The slave owner's failure was a failure to properly apply the categorical imperative, not a refutation of it. Nietzsche shakes his head slowly. You move the goalposts, my friend. When moral intuitions align with your theory, you claim vindication. When they diverge, you claim misapplication. This is what I mean by useful illusion. Your theory cannot be falsified because you reinterpret all counterexamples. For the first time, Kant seems momentarily at a loss. He takes a sip of his long cold tea, grimaces slightly, then sets the cup down deliberately. Perhaps we approach the matter too abstractly, Nietzsche continues, pressing his advantage. What is the actual function of morality in human life? Not what moralists claim it does, but what it actually does. I submit that morality primarily serves to regulate power, to protect communities from internal strife and external threats. Different communities face different threats, hence different moralities. That may describe morality's origin, Kant concedes, but not its justification. We can recognize the historical development of moral thinking while maintaining that it progressively approaches truth. The first hints of dawn are now visible through the bar's windows. Neither philosopher has checked the time or suggested concluding their marathon debate. The bartender, despite his fatigue, has abandoned any thought of closing. Some conversations deserve to reach their natural conclusion, no matter how long they take. Truth or usefulness, Nietzsche muses. Perhaps that is where our paths ultimately diverge, Kant. You seek moral truth as if it existed independently of human need. I see moralities as tools, as expressions of life itself, neither true nor false, but more or less life-affirming. Dawn breaks fully over New York City. Golden light spills through the philosopher's den's windows, creating long shadows across the scarred wooden floor. The bartender has fallen asleep on his stool, head resting on folded arms. Neither Kant nor Nietzsche has moved to leave, though both show signs of fatigue, Kant's posture slightly less rigid, Nietzsche's gestures less animated. The street outside has awakened. Early commuters hurry past, clutching coffee cups and briefcases, unaware of the philosophical battle that has raged through the night, just feet away. We've circled this question for hours, Nietzsche says, his voice rougher now, but still intense. Let us address the implications more directly. Your universal morality, Kant, what does it demand of the individual? Complete subordination of inclination to duty, yes? Kant straightens slightly, as if preparing for a crucial point. Not subordination of all inclination, but independence from inclination as the determining ground of moral action. One may happily fulfill one's duty, but the happiness cannot be what makes the action moral. And there lies the poison, Nietzsche exclaims, loud enough to make the bartender stir briefly. You sever action from the fullness of human experience. The person who helps another out of genuine compassion, whose heart moves them to act, you consider this morally worthless compared to the cold calculation of duty. Not worthless, Kant clarifies, but not deriving moral worth from the emotion itself. Emotions are fickle, unreliable. A morality built on feeling is like a house built on shifting sand. Nietzsche leans forward, his eyes feverishly bright despite his exhaustion. Yet you admit a mother who saves her child from a burning building out of instinctive love performs the same action as one who does it from duty. The outcome is identical. Why then privilege the motive of duty, except as a way of elevating those who are constitutionally cold, calculating, detached? Because only duty guarantees moral consistency, Kant replies. The mother who acts from love would save her child, but might ignore another's. Duty recognizes the moral claim of all children equally. The bartender awakens with a start, momentarily confused by his surroundings, then quickly slips away to make fresh coffee. The aroma soon fills the bar, a homely counterpoint to the abstract heights of the ongoing debate. You speak as if consistency were the highest virtue, Nietzsche says, accepting a cup of the fresh coffee with a nod to the bartender. But life itself is inconsistent, partial, particular. We love some people more than others. We cannot grieve equally for every death. Your universality demands an inhuman impartiality. Not inhuman, but precisely what defines our humanity, Kant counters, also accepting coffee. Animals act purely from instinct and inclination. Only humans can recognize moral law and act accordingly. And what has this recognition brought us? Nietzsche challenges. Centuries of guilt, self-hatred, denial of life's pleasures. Your moral law is not the voice of reason, but the internalized voice of the ascetic priest, demanding self-abnegation, self-punishment. The morning light has strengthened, throwing both philosophers into sharp relief. Kant's severe features set in determined lines, Nietzsche's expressive face animated despite visible fatigue. You mistake the nature of moral duty, Kant says, It does not demand self-punishment but self-governance according to principles one gives oneself. This is autonomy in its truest sense. Autonomy, Nietzsche laughs. You use the language of freedom to disguise submission. One does not give oneself the categorical imperative. It stands outside individual choice, demanding obedience. True autonomy would include the freedom to create values, not merely apply a universal formula. Without such a formula, your creation of values becomes mere assertion of preference, Kant responds. The strong impose their values on the weak, and might becomes right. Is that the world you advocate for, Nietzsche? For the first time, Nietzsche hesitates. You simplify my position to make it monstrous. I do not advocate for the strong to oppress the weak. I call for honesty about what drives our moral judgments, not abstract reason, but vital human needs and experiences. The first morning, customers begin to enter the bar, early workers stopping for coffee, night shift employees seeking a drink before sleep. They cast curious glances at the intense conversation in the corner, but find other seats. Then perhaps we are closer than it first appeared, Kant concedes. We both seek a morality that respects human dignity and freedom. We differ on whether such a morality requires universal principles or can emerge from individual value creation. A diplomatic gesture, Kant, but our differences remain profound, Nietzsche replies. Your vision of human dignity is tied to our rational nature and applies equally to all. Mine recognizes the exceptional individual, the value creator, who transcends conventional morality to forge something higher. And who judges what is higher? Kant asks quietly. Without universal standards, how distinguish the truly exceptional from the merely destructive? The question hangs in the air between them. Outside, New York City moves at full pace now, the rhythm of commerce and ambition providing a counterpoint to the philosophical wrestling match inside. That, says Nietzsche after a long pause, is the central challenge of my philosophy, one I do not pretend to have fully resolved. Perhaps it cannot be resolved intellectually, but must be lived experimentally, dangerously. Kant nods slowly, recognizing both the honesty of the admission and its inadequacy. And therein lies my deepest concern with your position. You offer no guardrails for this experimentation. Without universal principles, how prevent the slide into moral chaos? The day has fully arrived. Both philosophers look suddenly out of place in the morning light, like creatures of midnight confronting the everyday world. Yet neither moves to conclude their marathon exchange, sensing that they approach some essential understanding despite, or perhaps because of, their profound disagreement. Midday sun now streams through the philosopher's den's windows. The bar has filled with the lunch crowd, office workers, shop clerks, and students from nearby universities seeking respite from their routines. The din of normal conversation provides a strange counterpoint to the philosophical depth charge still unfolding in the corner. Kant and Nietzsche sit exactly where they began, nearly 12 hours ago, though physical fatigue is evident in both. Their table is cluttered with empty cups, untouched food brought by the concerned bartender, and napkins covered with hastily scrawled diagrams and arguments. Despite their exhaustion, their intellectual focus remains laser-sharp, as if this debate matters more than sleep or comfort. We approach what I believe is the heart of our disagreement, Kant says, voice slightly hoarse but precise as ever. You fear that universal morality crushes individual greatness, demands conformity, and stifles the exceptional person. I fear that without universal principles we have no defense against tyranny, no ground to stand on when the powerful abuse the vulnerable. Nietzsche nods slowly. A fair assessment. Behind our philosophical arguments lie these more visceral concerns. He glances around at the lunchtime crowd, assessing them with a sweeping gaze. Look at them, Kant. Ordinary people, living ordinary lives. Your universal morality offers them comfort, structure, the sense that the universe cares about justice. Perhaps that is valuable for them. But for the rare spirit who might create something extraordinary, your moral formulae are chains. You assume too great a divide between the ordinary and the exceptional, Kant replies. The same moral law that protects the vulnerable also creates the conditions for human flourishing, including the flourishing of your exceptional individuals. Without basic moral constraints, your creators would be consumed by the chaos they unleash. A young woman at a nearby table glances over, momentarily captivated by fragments of their conversation, before returning to her lunch companion. Perhaps, Nietzsche concedes with surprising humility, I do not claim certainty, only the courage to question what others accept unthinking. But tell me, Kant, can your universal morality accommodate genuine moral progress? If moral law is fixed and eternal, how explain the evolution of moral consciousness through history? Kant considers this thoughtfully. Moral principles remain constant, but our understanding of their implications develops. We better recognize who counts as persons deserving moral consideration. We see more clearly how principles apply to new situations. The categorical imperative itself does not change, but our implementation of it improves. A clever solution, Nietzsche acknowledges, but it begs the question, how do we know our changing moral intuitions represent progress rather than mere change? Without some external standard, which would itself require justification, the claim of moral progress becomes circular. A group of businessmen enter the bar, laughing loudly. Both philosophers pause, momentarily distracted by the intrusion of everyday life into their philosophical sanctuary. Perhaps the test is practical, Kant suggests after they've settled again. Moral systems that better recognize the dignity of all persons create societies with less unnecessary suffering. This is not mere preference, but a recognition of what rational beings necessarily value. Now you sound almost like a utilitarian, Nietzsche says with a sly smile, justifying moral principles by their consequences. Not at all, Kant responds firmly. The principles are justified by their form, their universalizability. That such principles also tend to produce better outcomes is a happy correspondence, not the source of their validity. The lunch crowd begins to thin. The bartender, having witnessed this extraordinary conversation for hours, approaches with fresh coffee. "Gentlemen, I hope you don't mind my interruption," he says diffidently. "I've been listening all night and morning. I'm no philosopher, but I wonder if I might ask a question." Both philosophers turn to him with surprised interest, suddenly reminded of the world beyond their intellectual duel. "Please do," Kant says with unexpected warmth. "It seems to me," the bartender begins carefully, "that you both recognize something the other is missing. Mr. Kant sees that without some shared moral principles, we can't really live together or condemn terrible wrongs. And Mr. Nietzsche sees that moral rules often come from specific places and times, not from heaven or pure reason. Couldn't both be somewhat right?" Nietzsche laughs with genuine delight. Our bartender proves wiser than many professors. Yes, perhaps there is truth in both positions, though their logical implications remain in tension. Kant nods thoughtfully. The practical knowledge of ordinary life sometimes grasps what abstract philosophy misses. Your question is well put. The bartender, pleased by their response, retreats to his station. The philosophers watch him go, then turn back to each other with newfound perspective. Perhaps, Kant offers, morality requires both universal form and particular content. The categorical imperative provides the structure, but each culture and era must work out its applications through lived experience. And perhaps, Nietzsche counters, my value creators are not enemies of morality, but its evolutionaries. Those who push moral understanding forward by questioning received wisdom and imagining new possibilities. Outside, New York continues its relentless rhythm, taxis honking, pedestrians hurrying, the great machinery of American commerce grinding forward. Within these walls, two of history's greatest moral philosophers have reached, if not agreement, then a moment of mutual recognition. Our debate has no tidy resolution, Nietzsche says, finally pushing back from the table, nor should it. The question of morality's foundations may be one that each generation must wrestle with anew. On that at least we can agree, Kant replies, also rising. Though I maintain that certain moral truths transcend time and culture, I concede that their discovery and application is an ongoing human project. They stand facing each other in the afternoon light, these improbable debaters, Kant's formal rigidity contrasting with Nietzsche's volatile intensity. For a moment, something like mutual respect passes between them. "Until our next encounter, Herr Kant," Nietzsche says with a slight bow, "perhaps in another bar, in another city, in another time." "I shall look forward to it, Herr Nietzsche," Kant replies with formal courtesy, "though I hope next time we might begin earlier in the day." As they depart the philosopher's den, returning to their respective centuries and contexts, the question they debated remains vibrantly alive. Is morality universal or a useful illusion? Their dialogue, between reason and passion, between universal principle and particular perspective, continues wherever humans grapple with the foundations of right and wrong, the basis of how we ought to live together in this complex, contradictory world.